Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, April 16th. Derek Van Riper, Saris, Britt Tiroli here with you. On this episode, we've got some big news in Yankee land. John Sterling announced his retirement on Monday. We'll talk about Sterling's legacy as a longtime voice for baseball's probably most historic franchise. We're going to talk about a curious decision made by the Marlins on Monday. Max Meyer sent AAA after a really good weekend start against Atlanta. We're going to dig into a few rivalries, a heat check on rivalries, if you will. Talk about the most intense rivalries around the league right now. We had a great listener email suggesting we may have forgotten the Cubs as a possible top 5 team for the next 5 years based on the quality of their system, their ability to spend money. So we'll talk about that. And time permitting, we've got some buy, sell, hold lined up for the end of this episode as well. Let's get right to it. Let's start with the most surprising news of Monday, which was actually the John Sterling retirement. Mostly because of timing, right? It's the middle of April where you have this guy just decide, no, I'm done. And that's more or less what he said. I was reading a story about what he said to Michael Kay. He just didn't want to do it anymore, which is not usually what you hear people say when they walk away from a job they've had for as long as Sterling had that one, 36 years with the Yankees, and certainly a style all his own, right? I mean, his home run calls are unique. They are legendary. I think if you're not a Yankees fan, the first time you'd hear one, you'd be like, wait, what did he just say? And why is he singing? But the more you listen to him, even if you were not a Yankees fan, I think the more that style sort of grew on you.
100%. Like the first time I heard, like the first few times, for a while, I really disliked him. I just have to be honest. Like, I was living in New York. I was like, what is this? It's like some weird, like, reminded me a little bit of Hawk Harrelson, but like, a little bit smarter, but like also just kind of hokey at first. I thought, I was just like, but it does grow on you. I mean, the one thing that I like is, like, I say this a lot, but like, at least they had an ethos. Like, at least he had like a style, like you may not have loved the style, but like, at least he had a style. He tried something. He did something different, so I enjoyed that about him.
Yeah, I mean, I was in New York briefly in 2009, and I feel like when you meet him, you realize that it's authentic. I think sometimes broadcasters kind of have a tendency to kind of create, they want to really badly want to create their vibe and their lane and their special calls. And then you meet John and you realize, like, that's just how he is in person in general. Like, the Yankees win, like that. Yeah. That's him in the elevator with you, right? so to me, like, once I got to know him a little bit, and you then get new appreciation listening, because what you're seeing isn't him trying to be weird and be like, it is high, it is far, it is gone. Like, it is him taking his love for the game and just putting it out there on the airwaves. And is he going to give us the advanced analytics? No, he's not, because he wasn't into that and he didn't pretend to be, right? Like, I think what you can do the most as a voice in the game is just be authentic, right? Just be yourself. And I think he did that, and people recognize that. And he did that for a very long time. We're not going to see another John Sterling, because I think, as somebody who kind of relays the game to so many people now, you need to give the advanced stats, and you need to embrace the information that's out there. And so, yeah, I think the Sterling and Susan Waldman booth was criticized a lot for not doing that. But it's part of what made them unique, and it's part of what earned them such a cult following, right? Like, that's baseball, Susan. Like, that was put on t-shirts by RotoWare. And I think what's so cool about the whole thing is that he did it his way, right? Like, he could have said, this is my last season, and enjoyed little, like, ceremonies, the whole, he could have had a lot of pomp and circumstance on the way out. Instead, he woke up one day and was like, that's it for me, Susan, that's all. And then, like, you can't say anything about this guy without saying that, like, he is authentic, right? Like, he just realized, you know what? I'm old, I'm tired, I'm done with this now. And instead of saying, I wonder how much heads up he gave the Yankees. Right?
Doesn't sound like much, because he's talking to Kay about like not wanting to do it much longer. Then he's like, and I'm done.
Yeah, Brendan Cuddy for The Athletic recently did a Q&A with him where he said, I'm almost done.
That's where
I think we all thought, like, oh, another year or two. Not like, oh, he was going to wake up in mid-April and be like, I told you guys I was almost done. I'm done, right? But again, I think when you get to know the person, you realize that, like, it is authentic. Like, he could have, if he cared about attention or his legacy, done this and had like a retirement tour, and he just didn't have any interest in that at all. Like he did it, he loved it, he didn't love it, and then he left.
He's 85. I mean, it's okay to want to pursue the last other things you're interested in life. You know, like what are you supposed to do when you're 85 if you don't like doing something? Stop doing it. I think that's the next logical thing. So congrats to John Sterling on a great career. And again, a style all his own. And I think much like Eno said, I had the same vibe like with the Hawk Harrelson uniqueness. I think Hawk is the only other play-by-play announcer I can recall that would even be in the same stratosphere as far as how unusual his home run calls were. And the homerism also pretty strong in John Sterling as well. It's true for many broadcasters. I think it's a role that's changing a lot, though. I think to Britt's point, you do have to understand how the game is played now. You have to understand analytics. You have to be able to consume and digest that information and then bring it to your listeners and viewers in a way where they can understand it. And that's a really challenging job, right? I think we've talked about Jason Benetti kind of being one of the younger broadcasters that seems to find that line. There's still personality, but there's still really good information too.
Yeah.
Boog Shambi does it well. So that's sort of like the next wave. I kind of feel like those are the upper bounds of personality in a baseball broadcaster for that generation. Whereas the Sterling, the late Vin Scully, the Bob Uecker, like that generation, that's pretty much gone once this group of announcers is gone.
You know what's interesting? There's you didn't quite say it this way, but the more that we do analysis and the more that we want analysis with our, like more like sort of cold, sober statistical analysis, or maybe like sort of, more that we want research behind the things that our announcers are saying, the more that we want kind of like not so much homerism.
Yeah.
That seems to be the trend in a way. It's like, I'd rather you tell it straight. I'd rather hear the straight story rather than, poof us up. But, there is something maybe to be lost. I think of how excited Dave Sims was. There was he was doing an announcement. He was doing a game for the Mariners late last season. I don't know. Maybe it was the Cal Raleigh homer that I think it put him in the postseason or something.
Yes.
And Sims just lost it, and in such a great way. That must have been really cathartic for a lot of people in Seattle that were had been fans for a long time and suffering for some time at the hands of the Mariners. So there's got to be, I hope, a mix. I would assume so. But it would be sad if we kind of in getting more sober kind of stat based analysis that we lost some of that homerism, because they are the voice of, like, when I was growing up, is Sid Bream rounding third, and I can hear the call. So that's like, there has to be some amount of homerism. A lot of times they're employed by the team, it's like they're kind of hype men. I think you need to be a little more hype on the radio too, because I don't know about you guys, but I walk my dog a lot at night, and I'll put a game on, and those people they need to get you hype because you can't see anything. They have to be everything for you. Where I think on TV, you can let things play out. You can have a little silence while something is going on, because we're seeing the reaction. We're seeing the players do things. But I feel like on the radio, you need the Sterlings, and you need a little bit of that, it is gone, because you need something to react to. So I think it's the medium a little bit too.
Medium's changing. I mean, it's becoming less important over time. I think that's the other reason why that craft is sort of a thing of the past in some ways, or at least that version of the craft. But I wonder what will baseball on the radio or streaming baseball audio sound like 25 years from now? Like who will be calling those games, and what will it be? Because I do think that personality is important to have. I think it makes following the game a lot more enjoyable. Like that, I think for most people who listen to baseball, it's the soundtrack of every summer of your life. Like you have it. It's just there. It's always in the background. If you're not watching a game on TV, you're driving somewhere, you're going to a cabin, you're on vacation, you're going to work, whatever it is you're doing, it's always there.
But the TV announcers is an interesting thing. Have you seen this thing? There was this thing. I forget exactly what it is, but it was like some feedback that Netflix had gotten about their streaming, and that they wanted to make it less interesting because people were second screening. So people that were streaming, were streaming shows and streaming movies wanted to basically wanted to look at their phone, but wanted to have something on. And they would lose the plot if it was too complicated of a plot. So there was this feedback that Netflix got that they needed to make their shows less interesting or less complicated. So I feel like, and then John Boaz, who's hilarious, retweeted and was like, "That's baseball. That's what baseball was invented for."
Exactly.
It is a good second screen sport. There's a lot of break.
It really is. And even in our house, we'll have baseball. We have baseball on 24/7, but we often have other screens going at the same time. And so I wonder if that also dovetails with less personality.
But you need,
at least for the TV announcers,
you need that voice or those voices to break you out of your second screen haze.
Make you look up. That's what you look up when the announcer's saying something with a excited voice.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you want to talk about a team that is a prime second screen experience right now, it's the Marlins. This is a rough situation. 3-14 to start the season. And they take arguably their best healthy pitcher right now, Max Meyer, and optioned him to AAA on Monday. I saw the quote from Peter Bendix. They had several meetings about it. It didn't sound like they had a consensus plan. It was more of, I don't know, the youngest guy that had options left. And based on the schedule, they felt like this was the right thing to do. But I looked at their schedule. There are no off days. They could have shuffled things around, had guys on regular rest, and not sent Max Meyer down. I think the thing that bothers me about this, and it happens with other teams too, so we don't have to just dunk on the Marlins for 10 minutes or anything like that. Max Meyer had 23 swinging strikes against the Braves on Saturday. And we spent all of last year and most of this winter talking about how that lineup is a historically great lineup. And I believe that. I think they are that good. So if you have a guy who comes out and performs that well against that lineup, and 2 days later you're like, "Sorry, man, we got to watch your innings. We're going to send you down to AAA, maybe have you do some short starts." What are we doing as a sport? That is a gross process error, no matter which team chooses to do that. Because even if we're talking about a guy with so little big league experience, I could sit here and reasonably say, if he gets knocked around for the next 3 starts, you've got a reason to send him down. If he's really bad for a stretch, he's still inexperienced enough. But how you make that call 2 days after he pitched that well, he's pitched well across the board this year. And think about it from the workload perspective. He's a college guy whose last season at the University of Minnesota got cut off by COVID, canceling the year. He's had Tommy John. His highest workloads are in the low triple digits for innings in a season. How are you ever going to let him be a regular starter if you're going to play a stop-start game with his workload and mess around with him like this? It just seems like a miss on so many levels.
Yeah, I think didn't we even read in this latest injury stuff? There was a piece of analysis that said that it's better to continuously throw and periodize it, like we were talking about, rather than to have big stops. So that's a little bit weird. Also, to me, Ryan Weathers is right there. Ryan Weathers' ERA estimators are closer to 5. He's doesn't have the same upside. And I wonder. You mentioned youngest. There are these weird things in baseball that have to do with seniority, and just he's the older young player, so Ryan Weathers stays up. That doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe this is a straight tanking move where they're like, we're more likely to win a game with Max Meyer pitching, so let's send him down.
I hope it's not that. Meyer is a little older than Ryan Weathers, but those indicators are crystal clear.
Or service time.
Right.
Weathers has more service time.
But weird to have that be the deciding factor.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a bad message to send on a good team. It's an even worse message to send on a bad team, I think. we know the Marlins aren't good. Here's a ray of tiny glimmer of hope.
Right. Yeah.
You should, especially on a team that bad, you should know that if you perform, you can stay because this is a bad team.
Right.
Especially because of the way they changed the CBA to do away with like service time manipulations. So you wonder what this does mentally to a guy like that. You wonder what this does mentally to other guys that are in the minor leagues or on the Marlins. So I think this decision sends a lot of bad messages, a lot of ripple effects. Like we know how mental this game is. If you're Max Meyer, what are you thinking now? Right? If you wanted to save his innings, why can't you phantom DL him? Because people have been doing that forever. Why can't you at least let him be on the big league DL and get paid? You are literally taking money from him in this move.
That too, yeah.
I think it's really simple. Like I think if you have a history of injuries and you're on a team that's unlikely to go to the playoffs this year, and that is the nicest way to say that's the state of the 2024 Miami Marlins, you front load the innings. You don't try to stretch him out and have him pitching in the last week of September.
Make him every 5 days. Make it as normal as possible.
Regular schedule. When he gets to 140, 150, whatever your number is,
then just stop.
Then you're good. Because if he gets hurt while you're messing around with this and he doesn't get up to 140, 150, or 160, you just cut off your own runway for time. So just use that to your advantage as an organization. I don't understand why this is happening. Hopefully, 10 days from now, we're talking about Max Meyer getting bumped back up to the big leagues, but they had everybody else in the rotation except for Edward Cabrera with minor league options remaining, and they had guys in the bullpen they could have optioned down. They could have bumped Puck into a relief role temporarily. I wonder how long they're going to stick with AJ Puck as a starter. I mean, the first start was brutal. The second two were not as bad, but still not what you're looking for. So I just wonder how long they're going to mess with something like that, because they seem to think they've got a ton of pitching right now, and I think they've got maybe an adequate amount of pitching.
No, I don't think that they think they have a ton of pitching. I think that they're scrambling to make it adequate. I mean, we saw some rumors that they were thinking about maybe even trading Luis Reyes for a pitcher.
They should. They really should. They should do it like soon. Like Derek loves the early trades.
This is some sort of scrambling, I think. This is just scrambling, and it just went the wrong way.
Yeah, just pulled the wrong straw. Didn't have a good plan and ended up drawing the straw that got.
I think I might have, faced with these decisions, just put Puck in the bullpen. The command is really bad as a starter.
I think I would have optioned Ryan Weathers. I think
that's the other option.
It's easier to stomach that. I mean, he's got an 18.5% K rate. Sierra's up close to 5. The ERA is low, but it's not real. I think that's the simple move, and you're in a much better place as an org if you go that route. Moving on, let's do a rivalry heat check. What are the league's best rivalries right now? Is it fair to say that rivalries have ebbs and flows? Like there are constants. Yankees Red Sox will always be a rivalry. From now until forever, it will always be a rivalry. But on the intensity scale, if it's a 1 to 10, it probably can't fall below like a 5 or a 6. And it might be at a lower end of that range right now, right? So like, what rivalries are currently at the top of that scale? What ones feel the most intense because of recent games that mattered, bad blood? Like what kind of jumps off the page for each of you?
Well, don't the Padres Dodgers feel like one now?
I think
after everything with Profar and the Padres kind of winning that last series. And I think it's an example of the Padres wanted it to be a rivalry for a while, but couldn't compete with the Dodgers. Over the last couple of years, they've closed that gap. And I think now what you're seeing is a lot of bad blood between these teams. It's like really bubbling over. So I think
what was that Profar said again?
Oh, Will Smith called Profar irrelevant.
That's right.
And then Profar goes and hits a bases clearing double.
Had a nice catch in their last game.
And the Padres official Twitter account said like, seems relevant to us. And they tweeted the hit. Like, there is some like great trolling going on. So that jumps out as one. I think you're right. The Yankees Red Sox will always be one, but to me, it's really a down one right now because the Red Sox just aren't competitive. I think what we're going to start to see is the Orioles and Yankees duke it out because a lot of people expect the two of them to be the 1 and 2 in the AL East. And listen, they could be the two best teams in the AL. And so I think what you're going to start to see as we get past April and we get into like July, August, September is an actual heated rivalry. And for a long time, it was kind of like the Padres, Dodgers. The Orioles fans hated Yankees fans. I mean, I spent 9 years on the Orioles beat, and you could just tell, the Yankees would come in, they'd take over the stadium. It would be like a Yankees home game. And then once the Orioles have gotten good, that's gotten a little bit better.
Mhm.
But, they very much have that like little brother complex in Baltimore when it comes to the Yankees. And so now that they're good, I think the Yankees are going to start to kind of go from an apathetic fan base toward the Orioles, like they didn't really care, to now be like, wait, the only way to win is through this team. So I think that is going to start to grow this season. That's like on my trending up rivalries.
When I think, I'm thinking about like the different things that need to go into it, and proximity is a big one.
Yeah.
You're talking about like exactly what happened with the Dodgers and Giants and the Padres. There were long times, in the Padres history that you would go and there'd be more Giants fans at the game or more Dodgers fans at the game than there would be Padres fans. And as the Padres have gotten better, the stadium itself becomes a microcosm of what the state of rivalry is. Instead of the visiting team having more people, now there's more Padres fans there. There's more Padres fans to yell at the Giants and Dodgers fans that are there. So there's an in-stadium rivalry that starts to spill over into the players and onto the screens and onto social media. There's the flip side of this is we've had some rivalries that were further away. And, for example, the Braves and Mets. Like, I don't think there's a lot of Mets fans at Braves games and vice versa. They managed to keep that one going for a while, I think, just because they were both good. And when they were both good, that was a decent rivalry. I would have to say that feels like it's fallen off a little bit. And one of the interesting proxies that I have for like the state of a rivalry is just how many trades do they make with each other? And what you'll see is teams make fewer trades in division. And so, for example, the smallest, I think the Padres have made trades with everybody. But in division, you've got basically the D-backs, Dodgers, down there with like 6 trades each, and the Rockies. So those are the fewest trades they've made. But if you flip over to the New York Mets page, the team that they made the most trades with over the history of the Braves franchise, of the Mets franchise, has been the Braves. They made 40 trades with the Braves. The closest otherwise is the Royals with 38. And then there's a lot around 20 and 30. So I think that's like a little bit of a weird asterisk there on the Braves Mets rivalry. Is if they were truly like big rivals as we thought they were for such a long time, would they really have the most trades with each other in history? Like that seems like a little bit of a strange.
It seems a little lopsided, right? Like it seems like Mets fans want it to be more of a rivalry than I think Braves fans do.
Yeah,
because the Braves have been so good, right? That's kind of how it feels. You know what else we didn't talk about is the Texas rivalry. Houston and Texas, which I think we all saw bubble over in a big way last year in the playoffs.
Yeah, they always had the geographic rivalry, but being in the AL West together now, I think, is a big deal for Astros Rangers.
Yeah, like
that one has like intensified a little bit because I think both of those teams had some stretches where they were pretty bad.
Yeah.
But now they're both good again at the same time. And I
were they rivals when they weren't in the same league? Like
back when Houston was in the NL Central, those were weird times.
No, Houston was not like that good for a while. Remember they rebuilt but definitely I think we've seen the apex now because Houston has owned the postseason, and if you remember, Houston came and stole the division in those last few days from Texas. And Alex Bregman had that big locker room speech that went viral. That was like, they wanted to know what would happen if the Astros didn't win the AL West. I guess we'll never know. Like there was so much hatred that like by the time they faced each other, like if you remember, there was a lot going on in that series. There was a lot of anger. Remember, they kept hitting Adolis Garcia.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of temper.
Where is there like a potential for a new one to unfold? I think about expansion a little bit where, like if there was a Portland team, you could have a Portland Seattle. I don't know that Seattle is like natural rivals really with anybody that off the top of my head. Maybe I'm missing something there. Like the Central, what are the big rivalries in the Central? Like they're close enough to each other. They play
Cubs
each other
Cardinals.
a lot.
I mean, Cubs Cardinals is probably the
I was
biggest.
thinking AL Central, but
AL Central. The AL Central.
Cubs
I feel
Cardinals is a real one.
That's a
That's
real one. That one's a classic all time.
Forever.
You'll find it on any list, any article about it. Like in the AL Central, what is the worst long-term rivalry? I feel like it changes so much that one is one where maybe the best rivalry is yet to come. Like if you were trying to pick two teams in that division who are going to go toe to toe for the next 5 years,
maybe Tigers Guardians. They at least
Tigers,
in terms
Guardians,
of or
maybe
Royals, Tigers, Royals. They've got these young players, the young position players that are coming into their own there.
Yeah.
That could be where that one is. But yeah, I mean, on the NL side, in the Central, I feel like those are clear. I mean, I think the Cubs fans for a long time have done exactly what you described Yankees fans doing to Baltimore, where they show up in Milwaukee, act like they own the place. Brewers fans hate that. So Brewers Cubs, it's like the Cubs Cardinals is the bigger rivalry for them. But I do think Brewers Cubs is the biggest rivalry for Brewers fans. That's the funny thing about a rivalry is like your biggest rival might not see you as a mutual biggest rival.
Yeah, the Pirates were scrappy and started a bunch of fights with a bunch of people. Was it Pirates Reds? That kind of was like a thing for a while. They had a bunch of fights. Is fights like a prerequisite for rivalry?
You need some scrappy guys. And you need guys who aren't afraid to like pop off, right?
You need some quotes. You need some quotables.
Yeah, you need there was a reason why like Jose Bautista seemed to always be involved in stuff. Josh Donaldson, right? Like AJ Pierzynski, like these guys all said whatever popped into their heads, and they finally like fed into that. So I think it involves a little bit of that too. Like if we don't get the irrelevant quote from Will Smith, is that serious? Not nearly as juicy.
Has Giants Dodgers fallen off because the Giants haven't been so good, or because the Giants have had a lot of milquetoast veterans that don't really give quotes like that? Like Logan Webb is the closest guy you have to someone who might give you a quote on that front, and I don't know if it's just enough. The Giants Dodgers does not feel as fresh of a rivalry anymore as Cubs Cardinals, which is just as has been around as long as longer even than Giants Dodgers. But Cubs Cardinals just seems like it'll be there no matter how good either team is. That's how intense a rivalry. And I think Yankees Red Sox is still there. I know you make a good point that the Red Sox haven't been as good recently, but I think I've seen meaningless games between the Yankees and Red Sox where I was heckled for wearing a red shirt. It's just like like what? Oh yeah, I guess my shirt is red. What?
I mean, the Red Sox were in the ALCS in 2021. That wasn't that long ago. They're above 500 right now. It's so much narrative on that team. My God, the Yankees and Red Sox, when they're just a little bit down, they're the worst teams in the world according to their fans. Like you guys are 9-8.
To be fair, Derek, if you're a Red Sox fan, what have they done to earn your trust?
Oh, nothing. The way they're running the team right now is obnoxious. They're not acting like themselves. We've talked about that before. And the funny thing about them right now is defensively, they are just snowball fights. Like that is what the Red Sox have been in the early weeks of the season. So I get the frustration with how they're playing generally right now. Pitching coming through for Eno so far, though, too. So but I could see Braves Phillies sort of taking over Braves Mets in the NL East. Yeah, it could happen.
They've had some big postseason games against each other. They're at the top of that division. They've said there have been some quotables back and forth. So you had the whole was it Bryce Harper staring down the was a Braves player, wasn't it?
Arcia.
Yeah,
Lindor Arcia.
I think we need a team closer to Atlanta for the Braves to have a deep-seated rivalry, though.
Oh, there's expansion, baby. Charlotte or Nashville?
Charlotte, I think Charlotte somehow seems more likely to me, but that's for another day.
I mean, the numbers say it's a better market, but Nashville, the players, I think, want Nashville.
But it's going to take forever. Like, A, you got to get a team. And B, you have to become good to actually make that.
Right. It's going to take a while. They're going to try and make it a rivalry with lots of games against each other. And the Braves will just spank them for the first 5 years of their existence.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll see anything pop up out of the NL Central from the team, like Pirates Reds, like you mentioned before, or something like that. Depends on which of those teams actually hit their peak. We talked about just 2 weeks ago, top 5 teams primed for the next 5 years. We got an email from Greg, one of our listeners, and Greg wants to know if we maybe overlooked the Cubs. We talked about how both Chicago teams have a spending advantage, or at least should have a spending advantage relative to the other Central Division teams in each league. And Greg writes, I think it's probably fair to say that 4 of the 5 NL Central Major League teams are roughly comparable, as there was so much talk about their farm system. The Brewers have a fine system, ranked number 2 by Keith Law, 3 by Pipeline, 6 by Bleacher Report. On those rankings, the Cubs were 5th, 2nd, and 2nd. And even though they don't have a Jackson Chourio type player, they have a lot of players in the top 25, top 50, top 100 of various lists. Plus, of course, they can spend. So when you start looking at the Cubs and you kind of put the pieces together, farm system, which I think is good, as Greg points out. I think Keith has them 5th in his latest organizational farm system rankings that are up on The Athletic. Do we look at what they have coming and pairing that with what they've got on the roster right now? Do we actually see a team that's primed to do exceptionally well? Do they belong in that top tier? Are they in that next 5 group, kind of team 6 through 10 for the next 5 years? Where do you each evaluate the Cubs based on where they stand right now?
That's a tough one. I would not probably knock a team out of our top 5 for them. I think they're probably 6 to 10. I mean, the problem is you look at this team and yeah, their prospects, I think, are coming along. What I want to know is, like, are the Cubs going to get back into that upper echelon of spending again? Are they going to, they're not the Red Sox, but they also have sometimes, I think, claimed to be more constrained by things, when Wrigley Field, technically, I think, is like a historic landmark, and they get all kinds of tax breaks from the way that Wrigley Field is designated, correct?
They own their own TV channel now.
Right. Like, I think the money is flowing in, and I would love to know, and Ricketts have done a good job of saying, like, we want to compete. And GMs now are just, it's hard to see if it's ownership or GMs, because GMs are very much like following their models now. But for me, I would like to see the Cubs kind of flex their muscle a little bit more in free agency and get these like top tier guys and really make a splash. And I don't know if they've done that. I mean, they've gotten like the Suzukis, and they've re-signed Bellinger, and they've made these like smaller moves. But when I look at, like, are they going to be an organization that gets close and goes, we're pushing our chips in? Are they going to do what Texas did? I don't know.
Yeah,
Right?
there is a weird thing with the spending. They're at 224 million, says roster resource, so they're right up against the luxury tax.
Yep.
It's not so much spend or not. It's the type of spending is a little bit weird. They've always gotten like the 2nd or 3rd or 4th best free agent. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. They've never won the winter, which, like, you don't have to, but also you're the Chicago Cubs.
And so what ends up being is, like, it does, like, the roster is bloated contract wise, and like 224 is like a decent amount of spending, but then you look and you're like, okay, so they got a lot of like Bellinger, I don't think is the MVP. Dansby Swanson is like a fine shortstop. Ian Happ is fine. Seiya Suzuki, I was thinking might break out this year, but maybe he's just okay. And Tyon is, hasn't been great yet, but maybe he'll be okay. Everyone just seems to be like kind of okay. And that's a little bit weird. Is like, that's how I feel about their prospects too. Like, I just don't see, PeteCrow-Armstrong strikes out a lot. Owen Cassidy strikes out a lot. A lot of their like prospect hitters strike out a lot. And that doesn't mean they can't be good major league hitters, but there's no like guy who strikes out 10% of the time and, has a 250 ISO and runs and it plays center field. Like, there's no like, here's the jewel. And that's even reflected in the rankings. You said it, like, oh, there's a bunch of top 100 guys. How many top 50 guys are there? How many top 25 guys are there? Do they have one top 10 guy? It's like if I was
Armstrong's high, isn't he?
He's like a notch. He's just outside the top 10 on most lists. Like, Keith has him 18th, right? Like, I think PeteCrow-Armstrong.
I personally might ding him more for what's happened, because the strikeout rate went through the roof and the power doesn't seem real.
I wonder how much of the strikeout rate jumping is the automated balls and strikes system at AAA, and how much of that's a hit tool problem. He's been so young for the level everywhere he's played. Like, I'm willing to give him a lot more time. And I think the reason PeteCrow-Armstrong has popped on prospect lists for a long time is because he was going to be a Gold Glove caliber center fielder from the day he was drafted. I mean, the Mets originally drafted him. the expectation was he could play center field in the big leagues right now. Wasn't a good idea coming out of high school, of course, because the bat wasn't ready. But that's how good of a defender he was at that age. So like that buys you a lot of time in the big leagues. Even if you're an amazing glove, average, below average bat, you're still probably a 2.5 win player most years. So that's something. I think it depends on where you fall in Matt Shaw as a hitter. We saw Kevin Alcantara in the fall league. I just thought he looked tired. He was in the home run derby. I think he was in the Fall Stars game too.
There's another guy with a full big strikeout rate.
Yeah, like so I'm not locked in on Kevin Alcantara just yet, but I also have seen plenty of guys that were just tired in the fall league who ended up being fine once they rested and came back and moved up a level. So I think it's a good group of prospects. I'm not fighting that at all. I think Cade Horton's really important for them because I think he might be better than a lot of the other pitching that they've developed. There's a pretty big gap between where you'll find Cade Horton on a prospect list and where you're going to find someone like Ben Brown, who we're already seeing right now. Maybe they got a big hit in that Michael Busch trade. 5 straight games with a homer, and he's been red hot to start the season. So that'd be a nice boost to the core if they actually found a key bat like that in an inexpensive trade.
But like, remember the old Cubs that like came together with the
Rizzo, Baez, Bryant. They
didn't have that?
Those guys. I think this group is a little less than that. Just a little bit.
That's how I feel.
Maybe it's
I think they're a 6 to 10. I think it's a good point to bring them up. I don't know if I put them in the top 5.
I think to Britt's point, and this is something that happens to the Giants a lot too. Oh, they don't win the top players. There's only a few top players to go around. And that's been increasingly difficult. So when we look at Juan Soto, who's going to be the best position player free agent available in the winter, only one team's going to get Juan Soto. So it's probably the Yankees. And that means the Cubs and the Giants and everybody else is a loser as it pertains to Juan Soto.
Fighting for the second and third and fourth best free agent.
Right. They'll be throwing darts at Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman, right? And those are good players too. And they'll be impact guys. They'll fit really well most places they're likely to go. But I do think something has changed in terms of just the number of players you can get that are like ultra wins as blockbuster free agents. It's kind of rare. There aren't that many of those players.
I think it's extensions. The players have seen that the free agent market, it's like almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. The players see that the free agent market doesn't seem as lucrative anymore, especially if you're not the number one guy out there, right? So if you don't necessarily think you're the number one guy, then you think you should take an extension. If you take an extension, you take yourself off the market and you make the market worse. So it's like kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy, and the more that younger guys will take it to get security, and I don't blame them, but that keeps them out of the market too. So these extensions, I think, are making the market worse.
So the other question with the Cubs before we move on is, what are their organizational strengths? Like, what do you think the best attributes of the organization are? Are they good at developing young hitters? Are they good in trades? Are they good at finding old undervalued players? Are they good at developing pitching that teams just don't scout properly? They find a guy and make him better, right? Is what they did with Justin Steele a repeatable skill that you would buy into? Like, what is their DNA as an organization right now that would make them whatever it is they are, whether they're top 5, top 10? I'll keep them in that 6 to 10 range. I think they belong there. But what makes them special as an organization?
I'm not sure.
I don't know if they have anything that stands out. I think they're like a quintessential middle of the pack.
I mean, they seem to do everything somewhat well, but do they have anything they do exceptionally well?
I'll defer to Eno, who's way more into the stats. I think on the big league level, recognizing that Craig Counsell may give them an upgrade over David Ross is a risky move. And I think not only did they pay Craig Counsell a lot of money, but they invested in their big league coaches. They're paying big league coaches a lot of money. And I think that's important.
That's a little bit like the Giants did with the 107 win team. Feel like they can coach up their veterans. Interesting analysis must have gone behind that. So I do think that there is a link in the Cubs between analysis that is done by their R&D team and what ends up on the field. So that's good. There's a lot of teams that don't have that. And the evidence I have of that is that the Cubs were big into cut ride, a type of fastball that Steele throws. But there's a couple other examples of it in the organization, and they were probably a little bit out in front of it. And they didn't give everybody a cut ride fastball, which is kind of what happened with the sweeper in some organizations. But instead, they gave the right people cut ride fastballs, and it helped them. So, I kind of feel like there's a little bit of a nation, examples and some like good working between the R&D team and the rest of in terms of coaching and scouting and player development. And we'll see how Horton and Brown and Assad do. Those are the 3 young pitchers that I'm most excited about. And if those guys hit the upper ends of their abilities, then I think we can say that there is something, because we do know that there's been writing. Sahadev Sharma wrote a really nice piece about their pitching lab and, the different things that they've done before Craig Breslow left. So there's been work on the pitching development pipeline. If we start to see that work, we'll get another piece of evidence that like this is an analytically driven team where the scouts and the coaches and the R&D guys are all on the same page. So there's a little bit of maybe some evidence of that, but I wouldn't quite say that they are, the Astros of a couple years ago where, they seem to be doing everything right.
Yeah, and I think the inverse of that question is, well, do they have any clear organizational weaknesses? No, I don't think they have any major flaws either. So that's a good spot to be. And I think just being on
their
the same
prospects
page,
all striking out so much seems like a bit of a problem. But they're not major leaguers.
Yeah.
So their major leagues team doesn't strike out that much.
Right.
So It could just be, the normal sort of sloughing through of the prospect list that every team does.
I think the thing I would want to dig into more closely with the prospects is, are they striking out because they're not swinging enough? The Jack Sawinski problem? Or are they striking out because they don't understand the zone like that, or they have major holes that are,
or do they
apart.
value, it could be a scouting thing too. Do they just value raw power over bat to ball?
Right.
Like the Guardians are the opposite of this. They obviously value bat to ball over almost anything else.
Which didn't really work out, though. I think they were anticipating with the new rules last year that they'd kind of be ahead of the curve, and it didn't really work out.
I have a piece today about young players adding power, and maybe they thought, oh, we'll get another Francisco Lindor and another Jose Ramirez out of this process, and they haven't quite yet. I mean, Josh Naylor is the closest guy to a guy who's like hitting for power and making contact the kind of way they wanted. But they've run through Tyler Freeman, Brian Rocchio, Andres Jimenez. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of guys who make contact but haven't really added the power. Stephen Kwan.
The other thing about the Cubs, last thought, is that the pitching is different. They do not seem to chase the same types of pitchers that other organizations do, right? And if they have a philosophy and that lab, and they have that propensity to teach cut ride fastballs where appropriate, that seems like a much better plan than doing what everyone else is doing and just blowing through arms at an alarming rate, right? So maybe their approach leads them to healthier outcomes. Maybe they develop fewer 5-WAR starters, but they have lots of guys that stay healthy and give them innings. And maybe that ends up making a difference for them in the long run as well. So I think that's the other kind of interesting thing about the way they have handled that aspect of the organization.
They develop velo in the minor leagues, but their major leaguers do not no show plus velo.
It's weird.
So yeah, there is still like some stuff where you look at the minor leagues and you look at the major leagues and you're like, are these the same organization? So maybe there's a disconnect there, but
maybe it's just what they had. Maybe they found guys that they could kind of use in the short term, and they're developing pitchers that look more like other teams' pitchers right now. That could also be possible, but I just think their rotation looks different and seems to get pretty decent results despite not having that velo. Let's move on to some buy, sell, hold. A scary collision for the first player we're going to talk about. Tyler O'Neill ran into Rafael Devers. That is a lot of human running into another human. Yeah. So he's second in the league among qualified hitters in WRC plus
8
this season.
stitches he got above his left eye.
Exactly. This is why I was going to ask you guys. Like, it's hard for me to now opine on if he can keep it up because I don't know how shape he's in.
Yeah, was he diagnosed with a concussion? Because
he's in protocol right now.
Yeah,
that just means they're checking him out.
Definitely seems like the kind of thing that could lead to a concussion. But let's just take what he's done to this point and kind of put that under the microscope. Are you buying into Tyler O'Neill being, let's just say, the guy he was in 2021 again? Because he's been red hot to start this season. And it's the kind of move that people in Boston might not have been that excited about this winter. But through 15 games, I think Tyler O'Neill has given them plenty of reason to be excited so far.
Yeah. I think that like what you're seeing is the makings of a career year. Actually, I think he might even be better than 21 because what I'm seeing in the early going, the kind of things that I care about in the early going are, contact rate, because the denominator is how many pitches has he seen, and his contact rate right now is the best of his career. Something like pull, that is all the balls in play, but it's something that stabilizes quickly. So his pull rate is pretty good. It's up from last year, and his fly ball rate is up from last year. So I see a guy who sees the green monster and is trying to just pepper the crap out of that thing. And I think that's going to be good for his game. This is a guy who has great natural power. He's also chasing less than he ever has. That the denominator there is pitches. So I see process underneath there that I'm buying on every level.
So my one hesitation is when you talk to guys who have had concussion symptoms,
that's right.
It can linger for months.
We saw Anthony Rizzo, right? That was
I hope this is not the case. He's going through the protocol right now. But we've talked about how hitting is it's an art and a science, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's such a fine thing that I agree with, if we had done this podcast yesterday before the collision, I would have also been on board. I am a little hesitant now because, as you guys mentioned, he collided with a big boy, Rafael Devers. It wasn't good. He needed 8 stitches. I'm really hoping that maybe he just gets some rest and really avoided some lingering symptoms because, baseball, it's not like hockey. This isn't nearly as common, but if you talk to guys who have experienced some of this stuff, and it could be scary, and these are symptoms that don't really go away, and guys very rarely want to not play because they have a headache or they feel a little lightheaded, right? They're going to want to be out
especially
there.
Tyler, like in this
especially
year,
a guy like this.
He's in his contract year, he's having this kind of numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's something to watch. I don't hope that there's a precipitous drop, but it might be something to monitor over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'll buy with an asterisk for the reasons that Eno mentioned. The key for Tyler O'Neill for the last couple of years has just been staying on the field. A lot of problems, soft tissue problems with his legs that have cost him time. So if he's able to keep those away, and if this doesn't turn into a major concussion-related problem, I think Tyler O'Neill could be primed for another year. I think it's more like 21. I don't know if it's another level above that, but he's a good player when he's healthy. I think that was lost on some folks because of how the last 2 years went for him in St. Louis. Let's talk about Francisco Lindor. A really quiet start for him. I think I made this graphic last week. He's up to a 48 WRC plus now. I think this leads us to a bigger question. It's still bad, right? Yeah, it was 22 through 10 games, and now it's 16 games at a 48 WRC plus. When do you actually start to worry about a player's slow start? Francisco Lindor's track record is really good. His plate skills still look great. He's striking out less than 10% of the time. This to me just looks like an early slump, some bad luck. And the Mets, after that 0-5 start, have actually kind of come back to life. So it's not like they're having one of those miserable starts that takes a bad week and it turns into a bad month for every single player on the roster because they're just trying to swing their way out of it, right? So what's the actual level of concern with Lindor? But the bigger question, when would you actually be worried about a player with that sort of track record, especially underperforming?
I wouldn't be worried till June. I mean, you look at Lindor, and it's not just this year. It's not just last year. His entire career. Look at his stats the first month of the season. It's the worst month of the season he's had since he entered the big leagues. He's just a slow starter. People have talked to him about it. He's well aware about it, obviously. And I just don't think that a whole lot can be done. He's a feel guy. He's someone that just needs all those reps. And as you mentioned, his numbers are going to be there. Now, the argument is, and I do pay attention to the Mets more than some other teams because I do some SNY stuff. The argument is that last year they got off to a bad start, and Lindor having a bad start at the beginning of the year can sink them, right? Because during that early stretch, it wasn't just Lindor. Nobody was hitting. Well, now you're seeing some of these guys kind of turn the corner a little bit. You're seeing Nimmo have better at-bats. You're seeing Pete Alonso, Brett Beatty. And everyone's still waiting for Lindor, though, because he seems to be the straw that stirs the drink. He seems to be the guy who makes that team go. So I think it's worrisome in that the Mets wanted to be a fringy playoff team. and they're going to need Lindor to be at his best, and they really can't wait and slog through a slow first Lindor half. But whether his numbers are going to be there at the end of the year, I don't think is any question. Again, this happens every single season to him, and he does turn it on, and he does post, pretty consistent numbers. I think the real question, though, if I'm the Mets, is I'm wondering, how can we avoid this? Do we need to play him more? Does he need to start games in January? How can they find a way to channel June, July Lindor?
We make a little personal heater he can sit in.
Right. How do they find a way for him to be that guy earlier in the season? Because they're right. The season was lost so early last year. And it wasn't just on Francisco Lindor, obviously, with Verlander and Scherzer. And there were a ton of other problems with that team. But they need him, and they need him to hit early. So I'm not worried about him, but I'm wondering how they can figure out, if there's a way to figure out how to solve this problem. It would seem like in 2024, we would have, I don't know, there'd be some kind of technology or a protocol or something for these guys who always start off slow, not for a week or two. A lot of hitters the first week or two are still feeling around. It's cold, whatever. Lindor, it's like that whole first month. And I'm not sure what you can do about that.
Oh, this is interesting. So players across the league don't swing as much in the first couple of weeks of the season. I think that's like what you're saying, sort of feeling out process, and they're a little bit behind maybe the pitchers. When they come out of spring. Lindor does that. Like if you look at his graphs for his swing percentage, he always starts out low and ends high. I mean, he's done that for 3 straight seasons, even beyond that. So I think that's funny, because when I look at his stats, I say, oh, there's some good stuff here. I mean, he's chasing less than usual, and he's making more contact than usual. It's just the power's not there. And so I'd put that in a different bucket, because power is just one of those things. He could have a 2-homer game tomorrow, and his stats like 48 WRC plus. He'd be like an 80 WRC plus if he hit 2 home runs today, So power is one of those things that is really noisy in small samples. And so I would just say, I don't worry about Lindor, but if I was his hitting coach, I might say, hey, let's just try being more aggressive early in the season. This sort of feeling out process doesn't really work for you, at least power wise. But if I was looking at somebody whose stats did bother me, because there is this general question, when do you worry about a slow start at the plate? It is a feeling out process. It's really hard to kind of just give you benchmarks, but I can give you sort of where I look. Jose Abreu, one thing I'll look at is age. 37. Okay, you're just less likely to bounce back from a slow start at 37. That's something you can just say. Projected bounce backs aren't as effective over 33. So he's 37. The next thing I'll look at is contact rates. Like I said earlier, well, his contact rate is the worst of his career, and you'd expect strikeouts to age poorly. So you're bringing that age portion back in. You're also looking at numbers that have good denominators like pitches. So I'm looking at his swing strike rate. I'm looking at his chase rate, which is over pitches. And I'm seeing a guy who is pressing, chasing, not making contact, and is an older player. It's not a profile that I would bet on to bounce back. Lindor, on the other hand, 30, best contact rate of his career so far. One of the best chase rate of his career so far. So I would just say this is kind of a blip for him.
Yeah, and I would say, just adding on to that, a younger player that I'm a little worried about, at least in the short term, is Parker Meadows for the Tigers. You see the K rate jump up into the 40% range. Teams start to back off players for playing time when they do that over a long enough stretch.
Him not start against lefties already, and
yeah, they're starting to do those small adjustments. He might find his way out of it and be fine, but I think he's in the realm of player that, because he only came up for 37 games last year, he's still just 24. If he continues to struggle, he could go see Toledo again. That's entirely possible. So I worry about it for guys that don't have a very long track record in the big leagues. You start to get to this point, 20, 25, 30 games in, that's when I see something like a K rate that's well above expectations as being more of a problem, because not every team's going to be patient with every player. And I think Parker Meadows is more in that class of prospect or young player where it's not like Gunnar Henderson last year with the Orioles, where you have a little higher degree of confidence that he's ready and that he's completely figured it out. Meadows is more like in that second tier of prospect where you might need to do something a little bit different with the development.
Yeah, Nolan Jones has seen a really big swinging strike rate increase. That's it's going to end up being more worrisome if the stats aren't there, because Michael Harris has seen an even bigger swinging strike rate increase than Nolan Jones. But Michael Harris's normal stats, his result stats look fine, so nobody's really talking about that. And maybe it won't matter in the end. But Nolan Gorman is swinging and missing more. These are all kind of young prospects. They're not elite prospects. Or at least weren't thought of, that way. And sometimes that can cost them playing time, like you said. So I think it's already happening that a change in contact rate is creating a situation for Austin Hayes to lose playing time to Colton Cowser. That's part of the story there. So, yeah, contact rates are something I look at a little bit early on. And I think they can be a source of, you'll see, because poor contact rates lead to strikeouts, poor strikeouts lead to poor batting average, poor on base percentage, less playing time.
So we're 3 for 3 on holding Lindor, right? Just to clarify, like, he's going to be fine. I think it is funny to see even the first half versus second half splits for his career, which kind of dovetail with swinging more over the course of the season. For his career, Lindor's batting average, 25 points higher in the second half. He goes from 264 to 289. OBP goes up 15 points to 350. Slugging percentage goes up 462 to 492. He steals more bases, well, in part because he's on base more, like on a per game, per plate appearance basis. He's more aggressive in that facet of the game too. So just something we've seen over several years now for Francisco Lindor. One more for today. Also need to update the graphic. I thought I made a second graphic and I didn't. Joe Musgrove. He has not looked like himself. He's managed to come away with a couple of wins in his first 5 starts. So from a fantasy perspective, at least you've banked those. But it's a 6.29 ERA, a 177 whip, and a 17.9% K rate with a 9.8% walk rate. That's the other unusual thing, right? I would have figured even if the strikeouts weren't there, walks wouldn't be a problem. Musgrove just doesn't quite look like himself. Fastball velo down a little over a half tick compared to the overall number from last year. We know early season velo should be compared to early season velo in past years.
Down, though.
It's still down. So is this just a carryover effect of the shoulder stuff he was dealing with last year? I'm starting to wonder if I just underestimated the impact of that injury possibly being a long-term thing for Musgrove.
It may be, though he also started last year pretty poorly and was able to rebound and bring those numbers down too, if you guys remember. So if he's hurt, okay, then obviously there is some serious concern. If he's not, I think he could probably rebound because he's done it. Like, this guy's whole career is an underdog story, right? He's only gotten this far because of his determination and his grit. He's not this like can't miss out stuff guy. So I think if health is there, I'm confident he's going to turn it around. I think those numbers are going to start to trickle down similar to last year. The real question mark is, like you said, DVR, is he dealing with another shoulder thing? Is he dealing with something else? And that's forcing his mechanics to change, or, his stuff to go down. Then you got a real problem. Then the Padres have a problem too, honestly. So I would like a little more information on him. I would like a report where he definitively says, I just haven't been pitching well, but I'm totally healthy. Right? That would make it a little bit easier. I'm not super worried if he's healthy about this start because, again, he's been through it. And we are talking about it is April 16th. Or we are 1/10 through the season? Not even. Are we? Are we at a 10th?
Just barely 1/10 because I think some teams have played 17 games.
Just barely 1/10. So to me, no, because all it takes is 2 or 3 good starts for these numbers to get halved at this time of year. But again, the injury history with him is what gives me pause.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his velo chart, there's a really interesting thing where if you compare April to April, he looks worse than if you compare to the regular season last season, because in April last season, it was pre-Mexico. And ever since Mexico, he has dropped about a full tick velo-wise. And that's in Mexico was when he had bursitis, I believe. We had some swelling in the elbow.
Yeah.
And then the shoulder problems came late in the season. So I see a velo that has not returned to where he was when he was healthier. And that does worry me. It really does. He does have the ability to spin it. Like he is really, his stuff plus is still pretty good because his slider's really good. His curveball's really good. His cutter's pretty good. Like he should theoretically be able to survive with this. But what you also see is fewer and fewer and fewer fastballs as he's not throwing them as fast. And so I just wonder if everything is based off the cutter instead of the four seam, because he's getting to the point now where he throws as many cutters as he throws four seams. It's about 20 and 17%. If you base his whole arsenal, if you sit in the box and you are basing everything off the cutter, then everything becomes sort of bendy and you don't ever have to worry about the straight, you know? And so maybe it's not as effective if it's based off the cutter. Maybe it's just, you know, if it's cutter, slider, curve, it's just degrees of bend, as opposed to when he had the four seam, you had to kind of straighten up. You know, can he straighten you up? So I'm a little bit worried. Yeah, I'm definitely not buying. Not buying. I will maybe hold, but I'm inching towards sell.
Yeah, I think cautious hold is where I'd be because you said the stuff numbers are still, you know, pretty good overall for Musgrove. I think he's got enough pitches where maybe he can find a new approach that will work. It's just a matter of taking the time to do that. 9 hard hit balls last night. He went 6, and after wobbling early, managed to grind it out to get the win, but it didn't look great. It didn't look like a good quality start if you actually watched the outing for Joe Musgrove on Monday night in Milwaukee. So I think there are some legitimate reasons to be cautious here. He's got the Jays coming up at home for his next turn, and he's got the Phillies the following week. So a couple of reasonably tough matchups for him as he tries to put the pieces back together here in the next few times out. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. That's the best deal we have going right now, so be sure to check that out. You can find Britt on Twitter at Britt_Giroli. Find Eno at Eno Saris. Find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.
One last nugget for everybody. Listen to the end. Jack Leiter is coming up. Apparently, he's more linear to the plate, and he's got the best walk rate of his career. He's also 4th in stuff plus in the minor leagues, so consider picking him up. I wouldn't necessarily drop an advanced player, but if you've got a little roster spot that you're playing with, Jack Leiter might be worth it. Thanks for listening.
That's baseball, Susan.